The Piltdown Man. In 1912, scientists thought they had finally uncovered the missing link between apes and humans. A fossilized skull unlike anything ever seen before was discovered in a gravel pit in Piltdown, England. It had the large brain case of a modern human, but the jaw of an ape, seemingly proving that early humans had developed intelligence before changing physically. This was it, the ultimate breakthrough in human evolution. Experts hailed it as one of the greatest discoveries of all time. Museums proudly displayed reconstructions. Textbooks were rewritten. For 40 years, the Piltdown Man was accepted as scientific fact. But there was just one problem. It was a total fraud. The skull wasn't millions of years old. It wasn't even from the same species. In reality, it was a human skull combined with the jawbone of an orangutan, deliberately altered to look ancient. The teeth had been filed down to mimic wear, and the bones were stained to appear fossilized. Someone had gone to incredible lengths to fake this discovery, and it worked. Scientists of the time were eager to prove that humans evolved in Europe rather than Africa, so they overlooked the red flags. But in 1953, advanced dating techniques finally exposed the truth. The Piltdown Man was a carefully crafted deception, one of the biggest hoaxes in scientific history. To this day, no one knows for certain who planted the bones. Some suspect Charles Dawson, the amateur archaeologist who found them. Others believe it was an elaborate prank by a rival scientist. What is clear, however, is how badly science wanted the hoax to be real, and how easily even the smartest minds can be fooled when they see what they want to see. The War of the Worlds radio panic. On the evening of October 30th, 1938, chaos broke out across America. People ran from their homes. Phone lines were jammed with frantic calls. Some even loaded their cars and fled, convinced the end of the world was happening in real time. The cause? A radio drama. Orson Welles and his Mercury Theater on the Air had adapted H.G. Wells's sci-fi novel The War of the Worlds into a live radio broadcast. But unlike a typical radio play, this version sounded like a real news report. It interrupted regular programming with breaking news bulletins, describing a full-scale Martian invasion of Earth. Listeners heard chilling tales about alien machines destroying towns, military forces falling helplessly, and a desperate government struggling to respond. The sound effects, explosions, screams, and radio static made it feel shockingly real. Many listeners missed the introduction explaining it was fiction, tuning in mid-broadcast and believing actual Martians had landed in New Jersey. Panic spread fast. Newspapers later reported stories of terrified citizens barricading themselves indoors, arming themselves, and running through the streets in fear. Though some of these reports were likely exaggerated, there's no doubt that thousands were fooled. Wells hadn't meant to deceive the public. He was just telling a story in a new and gripping way. But the broadcast exposed something unsettling. Even intelligent, rational people could be manipulated by the power of media. If a simple radio show could send a nation into hysteria, what else could be used to control public perception? Hitler Diaries. In 1983, the world's biggest historical scoop had just been uncovered: Adolf Hitler's long-lost personal diaries. It was a publishing bombshell. The German magazine Stern claimed to have obtained 60 handwritten volumes, covering Hitler's most private thoughts from 1933 to 1945. If genuine, these diaries could rewrite history and offer unprecedented insight into the mind of one of the most infamous figures of all time. Major news outlets rushed to verify the documents. The Sunday Times and Newsweek lined up exclusive deals. These diaries seemed to reveal a more humanized Hitler, suggesting he wasn't fully aware of the Holocaust's scale and had even doubted the war's direction. The implications were staggering, but they were completely fake. The diaries weren't lost Nazi relics. They were the work of Konrad Kujau, a German forger who had already spent years producing fake Nazi memorabilia. He had carefully crafted each diary by aging the paper, forging Hitler's handwriting, and filling the pages with historical details pulled from real records. But he did make mistakes. Experts noticed that the ink was too modern, and that some of the historical facts were lifted straight from old newspapers. When forensic tests were finally conducted, the diaries were exposed as clumsy modern forgeries and the biggest fraud in publishing history. The fallout was massive. Stern had paid millions for the fakes. Historians were humiliated. Kujau and the journalist who discovered the diaries were arrested. The Cardiff Giant. When workers in Cardiff, New York unearthed a 10-foot-tall petrified man, it was the discovery of a lifetime. Was this proof of an ancient race of giants? A biblical relic confirming passages from Genesis? Crowds rushed to see the so-called Cardiff Giant. For weeks, people lined up, paying 50 cents a ticket just to catch a glimpse. Scientists debated its origins. Religious leaders pointed to it as evidence of Scripture. The entire country was talking about it. But unfortunately, it was a total scam. The Cardiff Giant wasn't an ancient relic at all. It was a massive carved slab of gypsum. It had been artificially aged with acid and buried a year earlier by a man named George Hull. Hull was an atheist, and he was tired of hearing religious claims that literal giants once roamed the earth. So he decided to make one himself and see how many people he could fool. He had the giant secretly sculpted in Chicago, then shipped and buried on a farm owned by his cousin. A year later, he discovered it, setting off a national frenzy. Eventually, scientists exposed the fraud, pointing out that the giant had modern tool marks and lacked the density of real fossils. But by then, Hull had already made a fortune, proving that people will pay good money to believe in something, no matter how ridiculous it is. The Cottingley Fairies. They were small, delicate, and undeniably real, or so millions of people believed. In 1917, two young girls in England, Elise Wright and Frances Griffiths, produced photographic proof of fairies. The black and white images showed the girls sitting among tiny winged creatures dancing and playing in the garden. At a time when the world was recovering from World War I, people wanted to believe in magic, and they did. The photos spread quickly, capturing the imagination of the British public. But what truly sent the hoax into overdrive was the endorsement of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the famous creator of Sherlock Holmes. He was so convinced of their authenticity that he wrote a feature in the Strand magazine, declaring the photos undeniable evidence of supernatural life. The nation was enchanted. Were fairies real after all? Could this be proof of a hidden world just beyond human sight? The answer is no, it wasn't. The fairies were paper cutouts. Elise and Frances had used simple drawings, carefully positioned with hat pins to make them stand upright. They took the photos as a joke, never expecting anyone to take them seriously. But once the world believed, they felt trapped in the lie. It wasn't until the 1980s, over 60 years later, that the women finally admitted what they had done. Yet, even then, some refused to believe them. The Protocols of Elders of Zion. Some hoaxes are harmless. This one got people killed. At the start of the 20th century, a document surfaced that claimed to reveal the secret Jewish conspiracy to take over the world. Known as the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, it described a shadowy network of Jewish leaders plotting to control banks, governments, and the media. It was framed as undeniable proof that an international Jewish cabal was working behind the scenes to manipulate world events. But it was all a lie. The document was a forgery, created by agents of the Russian secret police to stir up anti-Semitic hatred. It wasn't based on real meetings, real people, or real events. Large portions were plagiarized from earlier political satire and twisted to fit an anti-Jewish narrative. Despite this, the protocols spread like wildfire. The hoax took on a life of its own. It was printed, distributed, and used as justification for discrimination, violence, and genocide. Even after it was exposed as fake in the 1920s, it was still widely believed. Adolf Hitler referenced it in Mein Kampf, using it to fuel Nazi propaganda. It inspired policies that led to the elimination of millions in the Holocaust. Even today, over a century later, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion continues to circulate in extremist groups. The Turk, the chess-playing machine. In the 18th century, a mysterious machine stunned audiences across Europe. It was called the Turk, a life-sized automaton dressed in Ottoman robes, capable of playing chess against real human opponents and winning. From emperors to grandmasters, everyone who sat across from the Turk was left speechless as the machine made brilliant strategic moves, proving itself a master of the game. The Turk toured royal courts and elite circles, defeating challengers from Napoleon Bonaparte to Benjamin Franklin. The truth is that the Turk was a total fraud. Hidden inside the machine was a human chess master, operating the pieces from within a cleverly designed compartment. A system of gears, sliding panels, and magnets allowed the operator to see the board and control the automaton's arm, all without being detected. The deception was so well crafted that it took decades for skeptics to fully expose it. The Loch Ness Monster Photographs. For decades, people have been searching for Nessie, the fabled creature lurking in the murky waters of Scotland's Loch Ness. But the image that made the legend world famous, called the Surgeon's Photograph, was nothing more than an elaborate hoax. Published in 1934, the black and white photo showed what appeared to be a long-necked creature rising from the lake. It was taken by a respected surgeon, Dr. Robert Wilson, which gave it an air of credibility. Newspapers jumped on the story, and soon, people around the world were convinced that a prehistoric monster was alive in the Scottish Highlands. But the truth is, it was a toy submarine with a fake head. The hoax wasn't exposed until 60 years later, when one of the conspirators, Christian Sperling, finally confessed. He revealed that his stepfather, Marmaduke Wetherell, a man humiliated after previously failing to find Nessie, had orchestrated the fake photos as revenge on the media. With a little ingenuity and a staged photograph, they had pulled off one of the most successful cryptid hoaxes in history. Even after the truth came out, the image remained iconic. It didn't matter that it was fake. By then, the Loch Ness Monster had taken on a life of its own. Sightings continued, expeditions were launched, and sonar scans searched the depth of the loch, all chasing a creature that had never been proven to exist. The Hitler Paintings Hoax. They were advertised as rare, undiscovered artworks, painted by Adolf Hitler himself. Collectors and historians were eager to get their hands on these alleged relics of the dictator's failed artistic career. Some even believed the paintings offered insight into his disturbed mind, making them invaluable pieces of history. Between the 1970s and 1980s, a flood of Hitler originals appeared on the art market. Some were landscapes, others were stiffly painted figures, all bearing what seemed to be Hitler's signature. Dealers and collectors snapped them up, some paying hundreds of thousands of dollars for what they thought were authentic Nazi-era artifacts. The truth, however, was far less dramatic. It turned out they weren't painted by Hitler at all. Most of these paintings were forgeries, produced by skilled con artists looking to cash in on history's darkest name. Some were entirely fabricated, while others were real, mediocre artworks altered with a fake Hitler signature. The scam was so widespread that in 2015, German authorities seized dozens of forged Hitler paintings from auction houses, putting an end to one of the most bizarre art fraud schemes of the century. The Bathtub Hoax. It was a quirky piece of trivia that seemed too strange to be false. Bathtubs were once illegal in the United States. Supposedly in the early 1800s, Americans believed bathing was dangerous, and some cities even passed laws banning bathtubs entirely. It was an absurd but fascinating fact, one that historians, journalists, and even encyclopedias repeated for decades. The story came from an article published in the New York Evening Mail in 1917 by journalist H.L. Mencken, one of the most respected writers of his time. The piece, titled A Neglected Anniversary, claimed that bathtubs had been introduced to America in 1842, but were initially considered unsanitary. According to Mencken, President Millard Fillmore had personally legalized bathtubs in the White House, helping to change public perception. It was a fun, dramatic, and memorable tale, but there was one crucial detail Mencken didn't mention. He made it all up. The entire article was written as a joke. Mencken had no intention of misleading anyone. He simply wanted to show how easily people accept false information when it's presented with confidence. But his prank worked too well. Readers took the story at face value, and within a few years it had become accepted as historical fact. Even reputable newspapers and textbooks cited the hoax as real history. By the time Mencken finally admitted the truth, the damage was done. Over a century later, the myth still resurfaces, proving his point. Once a lie is printed, it can take on a life of its own, and sometimes it never goes away. The Great Moon Hoax. People believed it, they debated it, they even built their hopes on it, and then it all came crashing down. In 1835, The Sun, a New York newspaper, ran a front-page story that shocked the world. Life had been discovered on the moon. And not just any life. Bat-winged humanoids, walking beavers, and lush forests covered the lunar surface. The source? A world-famous British astronomer using a revolutionary telescope. It was a scientific breakthrough like no other, or at least that's what thousands of people thought. The story exploded across the United States, and readers couldn't get enough. People gathered in packed halls to discuss the findings. Competing newspapers rushed to reprint the articles. Educated men and women debated what this discovery meant for the future of humanity. But there was one small problem. It was all a lie. The entire series, published over 6 articles, was a complete fabrication by the Sun's writers. There was no high-powered telescope, no moon cities, and the astronomer John Herschel? He had no idea his name was even being used. The whole thing was a brilliant marketing stunt designed to do one thing: sell newspapers. And it worked. Circulation skyrocketed. It took weeks before skeptics started picking apart the claims, and even longer for the truth to fully come out. But by then, it didn't matter. The Sun had cemented itself as a major newspaper, proving just how easily the public could be fooled. The Feejee Mermaid. When P.T. Barnum, the king of spectacle, unveiled his latest attraction in the 1840s, people were stunned. He claimed to have proof of a real mermaid, an astonishing creature pulled from the waters of the Pacific. For just a small fee, curious visitors could see the incredible specimen up close. But what they found wasn't the graceful, beautiful mermaid of legend. Instead, they were met with a shriveled, nightmarish monstrosity, a grotesque fusion of a fish's tail and a monkey's upper body stitched together. It was horrifying, yet strangely compelling. Despite its disturbing appearance, the Feejee Mermaid became an instant sensation. Barnum's advertising, filled with exaggerated claims and elaborate backstories, fueled public fascination. It's just too bad it was a complete scam. The so-called mermaid was a gruesome taxidermy creation, likely produced in Japan and sold to gullible Western collectors. Barnum had acquired it from a Boston seaman, who had himself been tricked into thinking it was genuine. Rather than admit the fraud, Barnum leaned into the mystery, embracing the controversy and keeping the public guessing. The Shroud of Turin. For centuries, believers have looked upon the Shroud of Turin as one of the holiest relics in existence, a piece of cloth said to bear the face of Jesus Christ himself. The linen sheet, which appears to show the faint image of a bearded man with wounds matching those of Christ's crucifixion, has been revered as the true burial shroud of Jesus. Millions have traveled to see it. Some claim it is the undeniable proof of Christ's resurrection. But is it real, or is it history's greatest forgery? Scientists have examined the shroud for decades, and the results are deeply controversial. In 1988, carbon dating tests concluded that the fabric dates back only to the Middle Ages, around the 13th or 14th century, far too recent to be from the time of Christ. This led many experts to declare it a pious fraud, likely created to attract religious pilgrims. The Catholic Church, while allowing veneration of the shroud, has never officially confirmed its authenticity. Yet the debate refuses to die. Some researchers argue that the carbon dating was flawed and that the shroud's mysterious image, a perfect photographic negative, cannot be explained by medieval techniques. No one has successfully created it with the same level of detail, leading some to believe that science has yet to fully understand how the image was formed. The Archaeoraptor Fossil Hoax. It was supposed to be the discovery of a century, a fossil that bridged the gap between dinosaurs and birds. In 1999, National Geographic unveiled Archaeoraptor, a stunning fossil from China that seemed to confirm a major piece of evolutionary theory. With the feathered body of a bird and the tail of a dinosaur, it was hailed as solid proof that modern birds descended from prehistoric reptiles. Paleontologists were thrilled. The media celebrated it as a groundbreaking scientific breakthrough. For a moment, it seemed like one of the biggest mysteries in evolution had been solved. But then the cracks began to show. As more scientists examined the fossil, something wasn't right. The bones didn't fit together perfectly. There were strange inconsistencies in the structure. Finally, a bombshell revelation exposed the truth. Archaeoraptor wasn't a real species at all. It was a Frankenstein fossil, made up of different creatures fused together. The missing link was actually a combination of at least two separate fossils, a bird-like upper body and a dinosaur-like lower half, that were carefully pieced together by fossil smugglers in China looking to increase its value. When it was sold on the black market and eventually made its way to Western scientists, no one questioned its authenticity until it was too late. The hoax was an embarrassment for National Geographic, which had rushed to announce the discovery without proper verification. The Balloon Boy Hoax. On October 15, 2009, news stations across America interrupted their programming for a breaking story that gripped the nation. A 6-year-old boy named Falcon Heen was reportedly trapped inside a homemade helium balloon, drifting thousands of feet above Colorado. Millions watched live footage of the silver saucer-shaped balloon soaring across the sky, fearing the worst. Could a child survive at that altitude? Would he fall? The National Guard scrambled helicopters. Police and rescue teams mobilized. It was a race against time to save a child in the air. But after 2 hours of chaos, the balloon finally landed and it was empty. Had the boy fallen? Search teams frantically scoured the ground, expecting a tragedy. But then there was a strange twist. Falcon was found alive and well, hiding in the attic of his home the entire time. At first, his parents claimed it had all been a misunderstanding. But when little Falcon let it slip in a live TV interview that they had done it for the show, the truth was revealed. The entire event had been a hoax, a publicity stunt orchestrated by the boy's parents, Richard and Mayumi Heen, who were desperate for a reality TV deal. Authorities were furious. The hoax had wasted thousands of taxpayer dollars, diverting emergency responders, and sent everyone into a needless panic. The Heens were charged with conspiracy, and Richard served time in jail. Thank you very much for watching the video and making it all the way to the end. I really hope you enjoyed it and maybe learned something. Comment down below what types of videos you want to see from this channel in the future. Thanks again. See you next time.